My parents showed up unannounced to mock my tiny apartment. They knocked on Unit 4B. I live in the penthouse, and I own the entire building. I watched them on security cameras. Then I called building security, removed the trespassers from 4B. The notification lit up my phone during a conference call. Building security system, motion detected at Unit 4B. 2 individuals attempting entry. I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet, already knowing what I'd see. My mother, Lydia, stood outside 4B in her usual pristine Chanel suit, one perfectly manicured hand poised to knock again. My father, Gerald, checked his Rolex with barely concealed impatience. They'd flown in from Connecticut without a word of warning. The irony burned. They were standing at 4B because that's the address I'd given them 3 years ago when I first moved to the city. A small studio apartment I'd rented during my first month here while apartment hunting. I'd stayed there exactly 28 days before closing on this building. But I never bothered correcting the address I provided them because after their last visit, I didn't particularly care if they could find me. My mother knocked harder. Through the audio feed, I heard her tell my father, "Nobody's answering. She's probably at some mediocre job, pretending she's successful." "The girl always did have delusions of grandeur," my father replied, adjusting his tie. "Living in this neighborhood on whatever salary she's probably making. The rent alone must drain every penny." I muted my conference call, a smile forming. They had no idea I was 12 floors directly above them, sitting in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. They didn't know I'd purchased this entire building 18 months ago, converting it into luxury condominiums while keeping the penthouse for myself. The tenant from 4B, a kind graduate student named Ashley, opened her door cautiously. The chain lock remained engaged. "Can I help you?" Ashley's voice came through tinny but clear on the audio. "We're looking for our daughter," my mother said with the imperious tone she'd perfected over decades of country club luncheons. "She gave us this address. We've come to visit her little apartment." "I'm sorry, but I've lived here for over a year," Ashley responded. "You must have the wrong unit." "That's impossible." My mother's voice sharpened. "Our daughter wouldn't lie about where she lives. Maybe she's subletting a room from you? Her name is Rebecca Hartwell." My stomach clenched hearing my old name. I'd legally changed it to Rebecca Sterling 2 years ago, part of completely severing the connection to my family's expectations and their suffocating judgment. "There's nobody else living here," Ashley said firmly. "Just me? You definitely have the wrong place. Now listen here, young lady." My father stepped forward, his presence meant to intimidate. "We didn't fly across the country to be turned away by some college kid. Let us in to look around." "Sir, I'm going to close this door now." Ashley's voice wavered slightly. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police." "The police? How dare you threaten us?" My mother's face flushed with indignation. "We're trying to find our daughter in this ridiculous building. Do you know how much we've sacrificed for her? The private schools, the tutors, the opportunities we provided?" I'd heard this speech countless times. The litany of their generosity, their endless sacrifices. Never mind that every gift came with strings attached, every opportunity conditional on meeting their precise specifications for my life. Gerald Hartwell had built a pharmaceutical company from the ground up, turning it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Lydia came from old Connecticut money, the kind where your family name opened doors before you even knocked. Together, they created an empire of expectations that I was supposed to inherit and expand. Instead, I'd majored in architecture and design, which they considered frivolous. I'd taken a junior position at a small firm instead of joining Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, which they considered insulting. I'd moved to the city to build my own life instead of staying in Connecticut near the family compound, which they considered betrayal. The last time they visited me, 3 years ago at that actual studio apartment, my mother had literally wept at the sight of my 400-square-foot space. She'd inspected the tiny kitchenette with horror, touched the futon with one finger like it might contaminate her, and declared the whole situation absolutely tragic. "This is what you left everything for?" she'd asked, mascara running. "This shoebox? You could have had a guest house on our property. You could have worked for your father and lived in luxury. Instead, you're here, playing pretend at being independent." My father had been more direct. "You're wasting your potential and embarrassing this family. When you're ready to stop this childish rebellion and accept your responsibilities, you know where to find us." I'd asked them to leave. They complied, but not before my mother left a check for $50,000 on the kitchen counter with a note, "For when you come to your senses." I donated every cent to a women's shelter and never cashed another check from them again. Now, watching them harass poor Ashley, I felt that old familiar anger kindle in my chest. They'd shown up unannounced, armed with assumptions and ready to mock whatever life they imagined I'd built. They wanted to find me struggling, to confirm their narrative that I couldn't survive without their money and influence. Ashley closed the door, and I heard the deadbolt slide home. My mother's outraged protests continued in the hallway. She slammed the door in our faces. "Can you believe the audacity?" Lydia's voice pitched higher. "That girl probably knows exactly where Rebecca is. She's probably some roommate Rebecca asked to lie for her." The building must have a superintendent or manager, my father said. We'll find someone in charge and get to the bottom of this. They headed toward the elevator. I watched them on the lobby camera as they approached the security desk, where Marcus, my head of security, sat reviewing his monitors. Marcus was a former police officer I'd hired when I bought the building. Professional, no nonsense, and completely loyal to the building's residents. Excuse me, my father said in his boardroom voice, the one that expected immediate compliance. We need information about a tenant. Our daughter supposedly lives in Unit 4B, but I can't give out information about residents, Marcus interrupted smoothly. Privacy policy. Privacy policy? My mother's laugh was sharp. Young man, we're her parents. Surely that supersedes your little policy. Ma'am, I don't have verification of your identity or relationship to any resident, Marcus replied. And even if I did, I can't disclose tenant information without their consent. This is ridiculous. Lydia's voice echoed through the marble lobby. Do you know who we are? My husband owns Hartwell Pharmaceuticals. One phone call and we could. Are you threatening me, ma'am? Marcus stood, all 6'3" of him unfolding from his chair. Because threatening security personnel is grounds for removal from the premises. I picked up my phone and called down to Marcus's direct line. He answered immediately, angling away from my parents. Ms. Sterling, he said quietly. The two people at your desk are my parents, I told him. They don't know I own the building, and they definitely don't know where I actually live. They showed up at 4B looking for me and upset the tenant there. Understood, Marcus said. How would you like me to handle this? I considered my options. I could go down there right now, confront them in the lobby, reveal everything. But the satisfaction would be momentary, and they'd find some way to twist it. They'd claim they always knew I'd succeed, that their tough love had motivated me, that they were proud all along. Or I could give them exactly what they'd come here for, a chance to feel superior, to confirm their prejudices, to mock my supposed failure. Let them think they'd won. Then pull the rug out. They're trespassing, I said calmly. Harassing residents and threatening staff. Standard protocol applies. Marcus's smile was audible in his voice. Absolutely, Ms. Sterling. He hung up and turned back to my parents with professional coolness. I'm going to have to ask you both to leave the building now. Leave? My father sputtered. We just told you, our daughter lives here. Sir, you've admitted you don't know which unit your daughter lives in, you've harassed a resident who has no knowledge of your daughter, and you've just threatened a member of my security team, Marcus said. You need to exit the building immediately, or I'll call the police. You can't throw us out. My mother's face had gone red. We have every right to be here. Actually, this is private property, and you have no right to be here without permission from a resident or legitimate business. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm giving you one more chance to leave voluntarily. We're not going anywhere until someone tells us where Rebecca Hartwell is living. My father shouted. Marcus dialed. I listened as he calmly reported two individuals trespassing and refusing to leave. My parents' outrage escalated into a full scene, my mother demanding to speak to the building owner, my father threatening lawsuits. The police arrived within minutes. Through the cameras, I watched two officers enter the lobby. My parents immediately redirected their indignation toward the police, explaining about their daughter, their cross-country flight, the insolence of the staff. One officer, a woman with impressive patience, let my mother finish her rant before speaking. Ma'am, do you have any proof your daughter lives in this building? She gave us this address. Lydia waved her phone. Unit 4B. But the current tenant says she doesn't know your daughter and has lived there for a year, the officer said. Do you have recent communication with your daughter confirming she lives here? Silence. My parents exchanged glances. The truth was, we'd barely spoken in 3 years. A few tense phone calls on holidays where I gave vague answers about work and they offered veiled criticisms disguised as concern. I'd stopped accepting their calls about 6 months ago. We're her parents, my father said, as if that explained everything. We don't need proof. You need to leave the building, sir, the second officer said. You're trespassing. Trespassing? Lydia's voice went shrill. In our daughter's building? Your daughter doesn't live in the unit you mentioned, the officer said. The security guard has asked you to leave. The building manager has asked you to leave. Now we're asking you to leave. If you refuse, we'll arrest you for trespassing and disorderly conduct. I watched my parents' faces cycle through disbelief, fury, and finally, calculation. They weren't going to get arrested over this. That would be humiliating, potentially public. They prided themselves on their reputation. Fine, my father bid out. We're leaving. But this isn't over. If you return without permission from a resident, you will be arrested, the officer said. Are we clear? My parents left, their exit captured in high definition on multiple cameras. They climbed into a waiting car, probably an Uber from the airport, and disappeared down the street. Marcus called me back. They're gone, Miss Sterling. I'll flag them in the system. If they try to enter again, we'll know immediately. Thank you, Marcus. And please apologize to Ashley and 4B for the disturbance. Add a credit to her account for next month's HOA fees. Will do. Are you expecting them to try again? Probably not today, I said. They'll regroup first. I returned to my conference call, where my design team was presenting mock-ups for a new mixed-use development in Brooklyn. My company, Sterling Design Group, had grown from my solo freelance work to a firm with 20 employees and projects across 3 states. We specialized in adaptive reuse, taking old buildings and transforming them into sustainable, beautiful spaces. This building, my home, had been my first major project. A 1920s Art Deco building that had fallen into disrepair, zoned for commercial use but sitting vacant. I'd seen its potential immediately, bought it for less than it's worth, and spent 18 months converting it into 12 luxury residential units while preserving the historical character. The penthouse had been a gutted, water-damaged disaster. I'd rebuilt it myself, designing every detail. Exposed brick walls, restored original hardwood floors, modern kitchen with commercial-grade appliances, spa bathroom with a soaking tub, and those windows. God, those windows. 16 feet of glass overlooking the city, flooding the space with light. It was mine. Every square inch, every design decision, every mortgage payment. Built with my own work, my own vision, my own money. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I knew it was my mother before I even opened it. Rebecca, we tried to visit you but there was some misunderstanding at your building. Very rude staff. Call us immediately. We're staying at the plaza. We need to talk about your living situation. It's clear you need our help. Mother. I stared at the message. The presumption in every word. The automatic assumption that I needed saving, that my life required their intervention. They'd flown across the country to ambush me with their pity and their checkbook. I typed back, I don't live at the address you have. I haven't lived there in 3 years. I gave you that old address because I didn't want you to know where I actually live. Please go home. Her response came instantly, don't be dramatic. We're your parents. We have a right to see you. Meet us for dinner at the plaza at 7 p.m. We won't take no for an answer. Something inside me snapped. 3 years of distance, of building my own life, of proving to myself that I didn't need their approval or their money. And they couldn't even respect a simple boundary. I called my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in real estate and had handled all my business dealings. Rebecca, what's up? Jennifer answered on the second ring. Quick question. If I wanted to send my parents documentation proving I own this building, what would be the cleanest way to do that? Deed copy, mortgage documents if relevant, incorporation papers if it's held in an LLC, Jennifer rattled off. Why? What's happening? I explained the situation. Jennifer laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Oh my God, this is perfect, she gasped. Yes. Send them everything. I'll put together a package right now. Official letterhead, notarized copies, the works. Should I include your company portfolio too? The Brooklyn project, the downtown loft conversion? Everything, I said. Every project, every property, every dollar. I want them to see exactly what I've built while they thought I was struggling in a studio apartment. This is the best revenge story I've ever been part of, Jennifer said. Give me an hour. She delivered in 45 minutes. A comprehensive PDF arrived in my email, property deeds, proof of ownership for my building and 2 other properties I'd purchased as investments, Sterling Design Group's portfolio showcasing 15 completed projects, our client list featuring 3 Fortune 500 companies and multiple high-net-worth individuals, and finally, my company's latest financial statements showing 7-figure annual revenue. I'd asked Jennifer to keep these documents prepared months ago, back when I'd first worried my parents might show up unannounced. She'd had everything ready, just waiting for my signal. I forwarded it all to my mother's email with a brief message, since you're concerned about my living situation. This should clarify things. I own the building you were removed from today. I live in the penthouse. I've owned it for 18 months. The address you had was 3 years out of date because I chose not to update you. I built Sterling Design Group from nothing, without your money or your connections. I don't need your help. I never did. Go home. I hit send and turned off my phone. The sun was setting, painting the city in gold and amber light. I poured myself a glass of wine from the climate-controlled cellar I'd installed in what used to be a janitor's closet and settled onto my balcony. 12 floors up, the sounds of traffic faded to a distant hum. The air smelled like late spring, full of possibility. My phone stayed off for 3 hours. When I finally powered it back on, I had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. My mother's messages progressed from shock to denial to anger to something that might have been hurt, buried under layers of indignation. This is clearly a mistake. These documents must be fraudulent. Who helped you with this? What man are you sleeping with who's pretending you own these things? Your father and I are appalled by these lies. How could you humiliate us like this? After everything we've given you. My father's single message was more direct, call me immediately. We need to discuss where you got the money for this. The assumption that I couldn't have done this alone, that some man must be behind it, that the money must be suspicious. Even faced with legal documentation, they couldn't accept the evidence in front of them. I blocked both numbers. A new message came through from Jennifer: "Your mother's attorney just called my office demanding to verify the documents." I had the absolute pleasure of confirming every single page. He sounded like someone had punched him. "This is the highlight of my week. Call me when you can." I smiled despite myself and made a note to call Jennifer in the morning. I called down to Marcus. "Did you flag my parents in the system?" "Yes, ma'am. With photos. They won't get past the lobby if they return." "Perfect. Thank you, Marcus." "Ms. Sterling?" His voice held a note of curiosity. "If you don't mind me asking, why didn't you just tell them from the start?" I considered the question. "Because I wanted them to show me exactly who they are when they think I have nothing. Now I know." Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept replaying the security footage in my mind, watching my mother's face contort with indignation, hearing my father's voice dripping with assumptions about my failures. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt hollowed out. I got up around 2 in the morning and walked through my penthouse, running my hands along the exposed brick I'd personally cleaned and sealed. Every detail here held a memory of creation. The custom shelving I'd designed to fit the awkward corner by the kitchen. The vintage light fixtures I'd hunted down at estate sales and rewired myself. The reading nook I'd built into the bay window, where I'd spent countless evenings sketching designs and dreaming about the next project. My parents had no idea who I'd become. They'd frozen me in time as their disappointing daughter who'd rejected the path they'd laid out. They couldn't conceive that I might have created something better than what they'd offered. I thought about the studio apartment they'd visited 3 years ago. It had been tiny, yes, but I'd loved it. The morning light that came through the single window, the bodega owner downstairs who saved me the good coffee, the sound of the city waking up around me. It represented freedom, possibility, a life that was entirely mine to shape. My mother had cried looking at that futon. Real tears, mascara running, her voice breaking as she'd asked how I could live like this. At the time, I'd felt ashamed. Her grief had made me question everything. Was I being stubborn? Foolish? Was I throwing away security and comfort just to prove a point? But then my father had pulled out his checkbook. That's when clarity struck. They weren't sad because I was suffering. They were sad because I'd rejected their vision, their control, their money. The tears weren't about my well-being. They were about their loss of power over my choices. I'd asked them to leave, and my mother had looked at me like I'd slapped her. "We're trying to help you," she'd said. "Why are you being so stubborn?" "Because this is my life," I'd replied. "Not yours. Mine." My father had stood then, buttoning his coat with sharp, angry movements. "When you're ready to stop playing pretend and join the real world, you know where to find us. But don't wait too long. Pride won't pay your rent." That check they'd left on the counter had felt like a test. Take the money, prove them right about my inability to survive alone. Or refuse it, and risk actual failure without a safety net. I donated it the next day and felt lighter than I had in years. Now, standing in my penthouse worth more than my parents' guest house, I wondered what they'd really seen when they looked at that studio apartment. Had they noticed the architectural sketches covering one wall, the models I built of buildings I dreamed of designing? Had they seen the stack of books about adaptive reuse and sustainable design? Or had they only seen the size of the space, the second-hand furniture, the evidence that I wasn't living up to their standards? My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Another message from my mother: "Rebecca, this silent treatment is childish. We came here out of love. The least you could do is meet us for breakfast tomorrow. We're flying back tomorrow afternoon." I stared at the message. Out of love. They'd shown up unannounced, tried to barge into a stranger's apartment, gotten themselves thrown out by security, and they framed it as love. What they called love felt more like surveillance. Like ownership. They loved the idea of me they'd constructed, not the person I actually was. And when the real me diverged from their fantasy, they'd labeled it rebellion instead of growth. I thought about texting back, but what would I say? That their love felt like a cage? That their concern was really control dressed up in nicer words? That I'd spent 3 years building a life so solid they couldn't shake its foundations, and their surprise visit had only confirmed I'd made the right choice? Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the files for the Brooklyn project. Work had always been my sanctuary, the place where everything made sense. Buildings didn't have expectations. They had problems that needed creative solutions, potential that needed someone to see it, bones that could be strengthened and restored. The Brooklyn warehouse was a perfect example. Built in 1910, it had served as a textile factory, then a storage facility, then sat empty for 15 years while the neighborhood gentrified around it. The owner had contacted Sterling Design Group after seeing our conversion of a similar space in Manhattan. I'd walked through it last month with my lead architect, David Monroe, who'd pointed out all the challenges: water damage in the southeast corner, outdated electrical systems, foundation issues that would require significant reinforcement. David saw obstacles. I saw opportunity. The bones are incredible, I told him, running my hand along an original support beam. Look at this timber. They don't make them like this anymore. And these windows, David. 16 feet of original industrial glass. We preserve this, we're not just building apartments. We're saving a piece of New York history. David had smiled. He'd worked with me long enough to recognize when I'd fallen in love with a project. You're thinking mixed use, aren't you? Ground floor commercial, residential above? Artist studios on the ground floor, I'd said, the vision crystallizing. Real working space with natural light and high ceilings. Loft apartments above with an interior courtyard. Green roof with community garden space. This neighborhood needs affordable artist housing, and this building is perfect for it. The owner had been skeptical about affordable units cutting into profits until I'd showed him the numbers. Tax incentives, grants for historic preservation, the marketing value of being the developer who invested in the community instead of displacing it. He'd signed the contract a week later. My parents would never understand this work. To them, success meant maximum profit, prestigious clients, appearing in the business section of major newspapers. They wouldn't see the value in creating housing for struggling artists or preserving a century-old warehouse that most developers would tear down for new construction. I tried to explain it once, years ago, fresh out of architecture school and still naive enough to think they might understand. My mother had listened politely, then asked when I'd be designing mansions for people of quality instead of wasting my education on charity projects. That conversation had stayed with me, a splinter working its way deeper over time. The casual dismissal of work that mattered to me. The assumption that value was measured only in dollar signs and social prestige. The complete inability to see that making beautiful, functional spaces accessible to people who couldn't afford luxury was its own form of success. The sky outside my windows started shifting from black to deep blue, the earliest hint of dawn. I'd been lost in work for hours, refining the Brooklyn plans, adjusting the courtyard design to maximize afternoon sun, calculating how many studio units we could fit while maintaining the building's character. My phone showed 6 a.m. In 3 hours, my parents would probably try the lobby again, assuming I'd show up for work at a normal hour. They didn't know I often worked from home, that I'd built my career with a flexibility that let me set my own schedule. Marcus would handle them if they appeared. But something about their imminent departure felt unfinished. They'd fly back to Connecticut thinking they'd come to save me from my sad little life, only to discover I didn't need saving. Would that change anything? Or would they find some way to twist it, to make my success about them somehow? I made coffee in the Italian espresso machine I'd bought after closing my first six-figure contract. My parents drank instant coffee at home despite their wealth, considering expensive coffee frivolous. But this machine, this ritual of grinding beans and steaming milk and creating something perfect, reminded me every morning that I could have beautiful things because I'd earned them myself. My phone rang. Jennifer, calling at 6:30 in the morning. Please tell me you're awake, she said when I answered. I'm awake. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect. Jennifer's excitement crackled through the line. Your mother's attorney called me at midnight last night. Midnight, Rebecca. He'd clearly been drinking, and he wanted me to know that he'd reviewed all your documents and confirmed everything was legitimate, and then he went on this rambling speech about how he'd known you since you were a child and he'd never imagined you'd accomplish something like this. Philip Daniels was drunk dialing you about my real estate holdings? He was emotional, Jennifer said. He kept saying your parents had made a mistake underestimating you. Then he asked if you'd consider meeting with them before they fly home, and I told him all communication goes through me. But Rebecca, I think this actually got through to them. The old family lawyer, who's probably been listening to your parents complain about you for years, called to tell me they were wrong. I processed this information. Philip Daniels had been part of my childhood landscape, handling my parents' business affairs, drawing up wills and trusts, always present at major family events. He'd watched me grow up. And apparently, he'd been moved enough by my success to call my lawyer in the middle of the night. What do you think I should do? I asked Jennifer. She was quiet for a moment. Honestly? I think you should do whatever feels right for you. Not what would be kindest to them, not what would make the best story. What do you actually want? What did I want? To feel vindicated, yes. To have them finally see me, absolutely. But beyond that? Did I want reconciliation? Apologies? Or just the satisfaction of knowing they'd finally understood who I was? I want them to go home, I said slowly. I want them to sit with this for a while. If they're going to change, it won't happen overnight because their lawyer called yours drunk at midnight. It'll take time, therapy, actual work on their part. And I don't want to be there for that process. I've done my work. I built my life. They can do theirs. That's fair, Jennifer said. Should I tell Philip that if he calls back? Tell him my door isn't permanently closed, but it's not open yet either. They need to do the work of understanding why I left before we talk about me coming back. After we hung up, I showered and dressed in my favorite design consultation outfit, tailored black pants, silk blouse, the vintage blazer I'd found at a consignment shop and had professionally altered. I looked like someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. The next morning, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize, Philip Daniels, who identified himself as my parents' family attorney. The message was formal, requesting a meeting to discuss family matters and potential reconciliation. I replied through Jennifer, whose response was a masterpiece of legal courtesy that essentially said, "My client declines. Please direct all future communication through this office." Ashley from 4B caught me in the lobby 2 days later. "Ms. Sterling, I wanted to thank you for the HOA credit. And I'm so sorry about what happened with those people. Marcus filled me in after. You handled it perfectly," I assured her. "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle. Can I ask you something?" Ashley hesitated. "They really are your parents?" "Biologically, yes." "And they didn't know you own the building?" "They didn't know anything about my actual life," I said. "I kept it that way intentionally." Ashley processed this. That must have taken a lot of strength. Cutting them off like that. "It was either that or let them control every aspect of my life," I said. "Some people can't love you without trying to own you." She nodded slowly. "My parents disowned me when I came out. I spent years trying to earn my way back into their good graces before I realized they were never going to accept me as I am. Sometimes family is the thing we have to escape from." We stood together in the lobby, 2 women who'd rebuilt their lives from scratch, and I felt a kinship I'd never experienced with my blood relatives. "The credit on your account," I said. "Consider it permanent. You handled an ugly situation with grace, and I appreciate it." Ashley's eyes widened. "Ms. Sterling, I can't accept that." "Sure you can," I said. "Consider it a found family discount." I headed to the Brooklyn warehouse for a site visit, needing to physically walk the space and verify some measurements for the courtyard redesign. My general contractor, Frank Rubio, met me outside with coffee and his usual clipboard full of concerns. "Morning, Rebecca. Got some updates on the foundation work," Frank said as we entered through the loading dock. "It's worse than we thought in the southeast corner, but I talked to a structural engineer who specializes in historic buildings. He thinks we can reinforce without compromising the original beams." We spent 2 hours discussing load-bearing walls, water remediation, and the delicate balance between preservation and modernization. Frank had been skeptical when I first hired him, this 60-year-old contractor who'd spent his career on new construction, now working with a woman barely in her 30s who wanted to save old buildings instead of replacing them. But he'd come around after our first project together, a brownstone conversion in Park Slope. He'd seen how I researched every detail, how I understood the engineering behind the aesthetics, how I fought for quality over shortcuts. Now he called me for every restoration project that crossed his desk. "Your parents still giving you trouble?" Frank asked as we examined the original brickwork. He'd met them once, during an unexpected site visit they'd made to one of my projects. My mother had spent the entire time asking Frank if he was sure I knew what I was doing, if maybe he should be making the major decisions instead of taking direction from someone so young and inexperienced. Frank had looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, your daughter's the smartest architect I've worked with in 40 years. If she tells me to do something, I do it, because she's usually figured out something I missed." My mother had pursed her lips and changed the subject. "They showed up at my building yesterday," I told Frank now. "Tried to visit me at an address I haven't lived at in 3 years. Security had them removed." Frank let out a low whistle. "They still don't know about the penthouse?" "They do now. Sent them the property deeds last night." That went over well. Frank's grin was wicked. "You're tougher than you look, kid. I respect that." We finished the walkthrough, and I spent the drive back to Manhattan thinking about what Frank had said. Tough. Was that what I was? Or was I just protecting myself the only way I knew how? My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Rebecca Hartwell?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar but professional. "Rebecca Sterling," I corrected automatically. "My apologies, Ms. Sterling. This is Diana Chen from Connecticut Monthly Magazine. I'm calling because we're doing a feature on successful entrepreneurs with Connecticut roots, and your name came up in our research. I understand you grew up in Greenwich and now run a successful design firm in New York. We'd love to include you in the piece." My stomach tightened. Connecticut Monthly was exactly the kind of publication my parents read religiously. A feature in their pages would be seen by everyone in their social circle. "How did you get my number?" I asked. "Philip Daniels, actually. He's on our advisory board and suggested we reach out to you. He spoke very highly of your work." Philip again. Apparently his midnight revelation about my success had carried through to the morning. "Can I ask what angle you're taking with the piece?" I kept my voice neutral. "We're focusing on entrepreneurs who left Connecticut to build their businesses elsewhere, examining why so many young professionals are leaving the state and what Connecticut might do to retain that talent. Your story seems particularly relevant since you come from a prominent local family but chose to establish your career in New York." There it was. The angle that would make this about my parents, about the Hartwell name, about my rejection of Connecticut privilege. They'd frame it as brain drain, use my success as evidence that Connecticut was failing to keep its best and brightest. "Ms. Chen, I appreciate the interest, but I'm going to decline. My business is based in New York for New York clients. I don't think I'm the right fit for a Connecticut-focused piece. We'd really love to include you, Diana pressed. It would be a wonderful opportunity to showcase your achievements. I understand you've completed some remarkable projects. I'm sure you'll find other candidates who are better suited, I said firmly. Thank you for thinking of me. I hung up before she could argue further. The last thing I needed was a magazine article that would give my parents ammunition to claim credit for my success or frame my departure as some kind of betrayal of my roots. But the call stuck with me. Philip Daniels had recommended me to Connecticut Monthly. Philip, who'd known me since childhood, who'd watched my parents pressure me into their vision of success, who'd drawn up trust funds with conditions about joining the family business. What had changed his mind about me? Or had he always seen something my parents missed? The next morning, I found a package waiting at the security desk when I came down for my usual coffee run. Marcus handed it over with raised eyebrows. Delivered by messenger about an hour ago. From the Plaza Hotel. Inside was a leather portfolio, the expensive kind my parents favored for important business documents. I opened it in the elevator and found printed copies of every Sterling Design Group project I'd ever completed. Someone had compiled my work chronologically, from my first small renovation to the Brooklyn warehouse currently in progress. Each project had detailed notes in my mother's handwriting, analyzing the design choices, the business decisions, the outcomes. She'd done her homework. Really done it. The notes showed genuine understanding of what I'd built, not just financially but creatively. She'd identified the through line in my work, the consistent focus on preservation and community, the way each project built on lessons from the last. The last page was a handwritten letter, different from the one that would arrive weeks later. This one was shorter, rawer. Rebecca, I stayed up all night researching your company. Every project, every review, every article. I'm looking at your work the way I should have years ago. With open eyes instead of disappointment. I was wrong. That's all I wanted to say right now. I was wrong. Mother, I stood in my apartment holding that portfolio, feeling something crack in my chest. This wasn't manipulation or guilt. This was my mother actually seeing my work, actually understanding what I'd built. But understanding wasn't the same as changing. And one night of research didn't undo years of conditional love and impossible standards. I checked the time. Nearly noon. My parents' flight was scheduled for 3 that afternoon. I sat on my couch, portfolio in my lap, and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Part of me wanted to call them. To say I'd received the portfolio, that I saw the effort she'd made. But another part remembered every criticism, every dismissal, every time they'd made me feel like my dreams weren't worthy of their support. One gesture, however thoughtful, didn't erase history. My phone stayed silent. They didn't try to visit again. At 3:30, I checked the flight status online. Their plane had departed on time. The building felt different after they left, like the air pressure had changed. I'd won, in a way. They'd come to mock my poverty and discovered my success instead. But victory tasted more complicated than I'd expected. 3 weeks passed. My parents stopped calling, stopped emailing. The silence felt like victory and loss tangled together. Then a letter arrived, forwarded through Jennifer's office. My mother's handwriting on an envelope with a Connecticut postmark. I almost threw it away. Jennifer advised me to at least read it first. Dear Rebecca, it began. No sweetheart, no darling daughter, just my name. Your father and I have had several weeks to process the information you sent. We've spoken to our attorney, our financial advisor, and our therapist. Dr. Morrison suggested I write this letter. I want to tell you that we're proud of you, that we always knew you could succeed, that we're sorry for doubting you. But you've always valued honesty, so I'll be honest. I'm furious. Not because you succeeded without us, but because you let us believe you were struggling while you were building an empire. You let us worry. You kept us in the dark. You denied us the chance to witness your accomplishments. Your father is hurt. He wanted you to join the family business, to expand the Hartwell legacy. Instead, you created your own legacy and didn't even keep our name. That feels like rejection, like you're ashamed of where you came from. But Dr. Morrison keeps asking me why you would do that. Why you would hide your success from your own parents. And every time I try to answer, I hear my own words from that day in your studio apartment. You are wasting your potential. You're embarrassing this family. I remember telling you that you'd fail without our support. I remember your father saying you'd come crawling back when reality hit. We were so certain we were right. The truth is, we wanted you to fail. Not consciously, but somewhere deep down. Because if you succeeded without us, it would prove you never needed us at all. And what terrifies me is realizing you're right. You didn't need us. I don't know if this is an apology. I don't know if you even want one. But I'm trying to understand how we got here, to this place where our daughter owns buildings and designs projects for Fortune 500 companies, and we're finding out from legal documents instead of dinner conversations. Dr. Morrison asked what I'd say to you if I knew you would actually listen. I think I'd say that I'm sorry I couldn't love the person you are instead of trying to mold you into someone else. I'm sorry I measured your worth by my own narrow standards. I'm sorry that my love came with so many conditions that you had to remove yourself from my life to be free. Your father says I should ask you to call us. To give us another chance. But I think we've already had all our chances, haven't we? Every time you tried to share your dreams and we shut them down. Every time you needed support and we offered criticism instead. Every time you showed us who you were and we told you to be someone different. So I won't ask for anything. I'll just say this, what you've built is extraordinary. The fact that you did it alone makes it even more so. I looked up your company online. I saw the buildings you've designed, the spaces you've transformed. You take broken things and make them beautiful. You see potential where others see only decay. I wish I'd seen that in you years ago. I wish I'd been the mother who celebrated your architecture degree instead of calling it impractical. I wish I'd visited your studio apartment and said this is just the beginning instead of weeping over it like it was a tragedy. But wishes are cheap. What matters is what we actually do, what we actually say. And I failed you. We failed you. If you ever want to talk, we're here. But I understand if you don't. You've built a life that doesn't need us, and maybe that's exactly what you had to do. Your mother, Lydia. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation, for hidden demands, for the catch. But all I found was something I'd never seen from my mother before, actual accountability. It didn't fix anything. One letter couldn't undo years of conditional love and impossible expectations. But it was honest, and honesty was something new. I tucked the letter into my desk drawer and went back to work on the Brooklyn project. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe I wouldn't. The choice was mine now, and that made all the difference. My phone rang. A client calling about a new property they wanted me to evaluate. A warehouse in Queens with good bones and better light. As I grabbed my keys and headed out, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked like someone who owned herself completely. That night, I stood on my balcony watching the city lights flicker on one by one. My building, my home, my empire built from raw determination and midnight work sessions and absolutely zero family money. Every brick was proof that their belief didn't matter. I believed in myself enough for all of us. Marcus called up from the lobby. Miss Sterling, there's a delivery for you. Flowers. Who from? Card says from your mother. Should I bring them up or refuse delivery? I hesitated. Even this felt loaded with complication. But they were just flowers. Bring them up, Marcus. Thank you. The arrangement was beautiful. White roses and calla lilies, elegant and restrained. The card read simply, "You were right." I placed them on my dining table where the evening light caught the petals, and tried to figure out what I felt. Not forgiveness exactly. Not reconciliation. Maybe just a tiny crack in the wall I'd built, letting in a sliver of possibility. My life was mine. My success was mine. My choices were mine. Whether my parents had a place in that life, and what that place might look like, was entirely up to me. For now, that was enough. The city sprawled below me, full of buildings waiting to be transformed, spaces waiting to be reimagined. Tomorrow I'd wake up and keep building, keep creating, keep proving that the only approval I'd ever needed was my own. But tonight, I let myself sit with the complexity of it all. The anger and the sadness, the triumph and the grief, the satisfaction of revenge and the unexpected possibility of something else. Maybe not reconciliation. Maybe just honest recognition. I'd wanted them to see me. Really see me. Not as an extension of their legacy but as myself, complete and separate and successful on my own terms. Mission accomplished. Whatever came next was just details.